I had the coolest job that any electrical engineer could ever have on the ground crew for Solar Impulse 2, the first solar-powered airplane to fly around the world only using the power of the sun. IEEE USA has given me a competitive edge because of their support system. It is so much easier doing something and being out of your comfort zone when you have someone there saying, "You got this." IEEE USA is more than just a network. It's a family.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to today's IEEE USA Livestream webinar, Leadership at the Edge of Performance. I'm your host, Jonathan Cho. This is the fifth and final webinar in our Ultimate Upgrade Essentials series presented by IEEE Senior Member Dr. Terrence Yeo. For more information on our previous ones in the series, you can check them out through the through the link we've provided on the screen below, as well as in the comment section. IEEE USA's goal is to create programming that is valuable, relevant, and of interest to you. As such, we will be sending a short survey to all registrants after this event and would love your feedback. We value your opinions and would appreciate it if you could take a few minutes and share your thoughts. Dr. Yeo is a scientist at FTS International, which has been named one of the top workplaces for the last 6 years by the Washington Post. In his career, Dr. Yeo has held a variety of roles in systems engineering, R&D portfolio management, program management, corporate strategy, and he is a project management professional. Without further ado, I will now pass it off to our presenter. Welcome back, Terrence. We're very excited for what you have for our audience today.
Thanks, Jonathan. Very much appreciate the time to be able to speak about the ultimate upgrade, leadership at the edge of performance. One thing that's really, really important to me as we go through this series is to really instill information, tips, tools, techniques that get you to that next level, that gets you to that point in which you are able to lead in every specific level and area that you have in your life. And so a lot of things I'm going to be sharing with you are specifically about organizations in general, corporate organizations, but that has merit in many other realms. We're going to be talking about some of those experiences that I've had in the past 5 years or so. I was the IBM Watson AI team lead for our company. We were able to do some really interesting AI groundbreaking work that enabled us to really do dreaming of new ideas and new concepts. And in that, we ended up having, I think, about 4 patents come out of it. And as I was doing those studies, I started to look at the organization of AI ML and started to see that there's a lot of things that are very similar to that of leadership and organizations in general. So we'll be talking about that. And then another thing we'll be talking about is gaming. I have a passion for video games. It allows for me the ability to try new things and try different roles that allows you to then see if those things would fit well, allows you to flex. And we're going to see how those organizations in regular gameplay today, the very recent games that have been coming out, are actually very good analogs for you to try out leadership techniques and concepts. So we're going to go through that briefly and quickly, but also slowly and methodically. So if you have any questions regarding these things, please start typing them into the question and answer chat service that we have here. We'll have a couple periods where we'll be able to answer those questions. So I'm really excited to talk about where we're at right now in the ultimate upgrade. So we started off in startup, being able to understand how to push yourself to your limit of performance and then go farther, go past that. And then as we go through that, know your strengths and weaknesses, do some self-assessment, understand your SWOT, your strength, weakness, opportunity, threat, and then look at your MBTI and then match those things together so that you're able to then understand how you can leverage your weaknesses to enable you to get to that next level, to that next step. And also how to temper your strengths in some ways so that you don't exacerbate weaknesses. So we worked through that, and then understanding that you can't do it all by yourself. You need to have a mentorship, the ability to have other people both in front of you and also behind you taking care of your path. And in that, throughout that process, you're able to find your path, to be able to work and get into places that may have been not ideal, how to be able to pivot and change that so that you are able to go into a more ideal cases. And those were the four presentations in order that allows us to think through the next step. So you found your path, you have mentors, you have the ability to work at the edge of your performance. Now we're getting into the leadership at the edge of the performance. And as we talk about this, just be aware that I'm looking at more of a metaphor in AI. And I'm going to jump straight into that. And as we go through AI, we can start to draw out principles of leadership from there. So let's dive in. So artificial intelligence, it's a real buzzword today. We want to apply AI ML to everything under the sun. The truth be told, it's been around for quite some time. I've been working with some of these things for the last 20 years in my career, starting off with very simple, hidden layers between two inputs and outputs, the perceptron. Right, so Rosenblatt, 1958, created perceptron, which could encode things that you couldn't really have an equation for, like the XOR function. And of course, I remember working with some of these things at my workplace, where all of us were trying to figure out what's the best place to go to lunch, depending on the number of people, the type of people, and the preferences. Strangely enough, when we went through this, we were only able to find one restaurant that everybody liked, which was the Thai restaurant. So we'd always go to this Thai restaurant, and the algorithm would always spit that out, no matter what people came about. And strangely enough, the training of these networks, right, was difficult. Rosenblatt didn't really know how to do that until Werbus in 1975 figured out backpropagation. Now, backpropagation, just as a primer, is where you have the inputs give you a specific set of data that you're looking into, and the output, let's say, is the classification. This is a cat. This is not a cat. As the process goes through and feeds the data through, there are a certain amount of weights, right, in the hidden layer, which are then propagated to the outputs that allow you to then say it is a cat or it isn't cat in a type of a value. If you want to say it is a cat and you've also given reinforcement training for that, then you propagate back through that network and say, which are the ones that gave me that positive number, higher number? I want to emphasize that. So give me a little bit more stronger inputs from there. And then going backwards from that hidden layer, say, what were those inputs that gave me those interesting parts that told me what that was a cat? So in many ways, if a cat has pointy ears and is fuzzy and has this particular whisker pattern, all of those things are boiled up through the process of backpropagation with lots and lots of data, right? So we're seeing there's a difference between humans and human beings who can actually look at a problem, try a couple times, and pretty much get about 80% of their capability right then and there. And we talked about the S-curves and our abilities that are beyond that of what an AI would need to do. The AI typically is, if you want to do something interesting, please give me 1 million samples, right? And with that, that is part of that backpropagation, right, of data transfer back and forth. Well, as I was looking at organizations, I said, this looks kind of familiar. This looks like an organization that I'm aware of. And if you think about it, it's kind of like a regular pyramid-style organizations from 1950s. So the structure of organizations, right, you have employees. That's the massive amount of people, the largest amount of people who are the most capable, who actually get the work done. You have supervisors, you have managers, executives, and finally you have a CEO. And in this structure, there is a boiling up of information, right? So you're giving presentations to your supervisor of what you're doing and what benefits those are. The supervisors takes that information from you and the information from your other colleagues and then boils it up to their manager and then to their executive, right? So at the end, the CEO has a very sharp idea, or actually a very broad idea, that's sharpened by all of the levels below them, that enables them to then move in their organization and make decisions. Now, as each organization level tunes themselves below, they look to increase that efficiency of motion, right? They're looking to say, okay, this particular connection gave me the answer I was looking for, a positive, let's say, margin in terms of engineering things. So I'm going to use them more. I'm going to ask to use them more. So you improve your relationships, your network in that realm. And if you see that going up and up on the chain, suddenly when the CEO asks, can you tell me how to improve the quality of this particular product without reducing without increasing the expense? How can I do that? The executives then go down the line and say, who are my networks that have this ability? So-and-so down in engineering has the ability to tune this. They found a specific material that makes this much, much more useful. And by the way, that material is a generic material that you can get on the open market. And our marketing committee, our finance committee has been able to buy this on the open market using our special relationships, right? So those continual things then mesh together and find that. So how does the CEO tell them that they want that? They're actually propagating information backwards. Very similar to the back propagation mechanism that we saw earlier with a traditional neural network. So I want to give that as an idea in your mind that some of the things that we've been working with and you are working with today actually have direct analog to organizational structures. And that's very normal because neural networks themselves were based off of our own understanding, very limited, of brain structure and how we make decisions. Now, as we work with other organisms, there is a superorganism, ability that that rises out of it. The sum is greater than its parts, and you see that with, let's say, ants. Ants only have about 1,000 neurons in their structure, maybe 1,000 to 10,000 neurons. But as you multiply the number of ants to 1 million, they can conduct very large-scale operations. They can go out and harvest food. They can actually create trash dumps in their nest. They're able to then transport materials back and forth. They're able to conduct wars and major tactical operations based off of this summation of information and the communication networks that are arising. So as we learn about these different aspects of organizations, it can be from other things in artificial standpoints like AI. So just want to pull that thread a little and just keep your eyes open for new ideas that are out there. One thing I want to talk about is, okay, the first thing you're going to say is a typical organization, today's organization is pretty straightforward. It's a pyramidal structure. But AI has moved on from that, right? The autoencoder has been one of the strongest systems in the 2015 timeframe that enabled us to do speech recognition, has enabled us to be able to work on understanding new things. That doesn't seem to show up in our daily lives or our daily organization. How does that work? Well, I will talk a little bit about the autoencoder first and then move on and how I think it actually applies to what we have today. So the autoencoder is a kind of a pyramid organization where you have an input structure at the beginning, and it has an ability to do self-supervised learning. So before, when you had the classifier give an answer of yes, this is a cat or this is not a cat, you are training the network through multiple iterations to be able to, through backpropagation, to be able to create that answer 1 or 0. In this case, there is no answer other than an ability to understand parts of it. It's to reduce the information. And so what happens is you take the whole available set of information, which some of it may be superfluous, others may be really core essential. Sometimes the superfluous plus a core essential becomes extremely important. Those aspects are pulled out through this compression of information. And then there's a separate network afterwards, which takes that compressed idea and expands upon it again. And the idea is to create an output that matches as closely as possible with the input. When you do so, you are able to then say the code, the embedded vectors in the very center of this structure contain the essential structures that are necessary to describe the input and the output. And how I explain it to others this way, is in this way. Let's say you have somebody who walks by who commits a crime, and you're a witness to that crime. And you look at the person, and you don't have a chance to take a camera shot, they run away. The policeman comes to you and asks later on, okay, can you describe the person who committed the crime? And you say, well, the person had dark hair, he had brown eyes, he was about 5'8", and he had a beard, right? Those are essential informations that then can be given to a sketch artist to then draw that particular person in mind. And then you give that person to the person, you give that picture to the person and say, was this a person? Yes, it was, but their eyes were a little wider than what you saw that I saw in the drawing. So they modify that, and then they give that. Does that match? At the end, they say, yes, it matches what I remember. That is effectively the process of an autoencoder, where you, as the witness, are taking all of the memories and the inputs that you had and compressing it into a few descriptive techniques. Then the sketch artist is the decoder portion, which takes those techniques, those key ideas, and then recreates based on their understanding of human anatomy, based on their understanding of how a face should look, and outputs that. And the comparison between the two is that conversation that we have. So an autoencoder has has merit. Just even in an interaction between two people, you can put that in there. But do we have that in organizations and in leadership organizations? And what does that look like? So what's interesting in this case is that most modern corporations actually have a lot of hidden complexity that we're not really aware of if you're just an employee. So employees have, supervisors, managers, executive, CEO, we're aware of that. But the CEO is not the prime boss. They have bosses. They have a board of trustees. Now, what do those board of trustees are? They typically are leaders of many other organizations in industry and academia and government. And they're looking at what the industry is doing, what the government is doing, what the academia is looking forward to. And by doing so, they can take, the CEO is really looking at what the employees are doing and what their actions are, and then using the board of trustees and their background to then understand what the industry is doing and how they compare. Now, as I talk about this, you can already see that there's something very, very similar to an autoencoder, that autoencoders are really the fundamental part of our modern organization. They're very similar. So as you rotate this very familiar structure of a typical pyramid structure of a CEO, and then the CEO having multiple bosses, so to speak, in the board of trustees who can fire him or her at any given time, you see that the CEO and the executive team around it are, their job is to really retain those embedded core values or ideas or things that describe what they're doing in relation to the rest of the community around them. So with this embedded vector, we start to understand those things, right? We start to see that the structure we have in human form actually are matching what we're designing in AI form. And we know the AI form works very well, and the human structures also work in that way. So again, there's a lot more to this. We'd love to continue to connect. I had some very good discussions with some of the IEEE Eta Kappa Nu leadership folks in the conference that we had a few weeks ago. Based off this idea, I tested some of these ideas with them, and they were really, really interested in learning more. And we had some really good discussions after the presentation. So if you have any questions, please do go ahead and put in a live session. We're going to be talking about some of that very, very soon. So what I want to talk about next is some other concepts that we found to do to make AI work very much better. One of them is regularization, right? So in any organization, especially since you have, let's say, a multi-layered, very deep neural network, there's going to be some sort of redundancies in that network. And if you run an organization this way to train for, let's say, classification, some of those nodes are not going to be very useful. Well, what the scientists have been able to figure out over years is that if you have some sort of dropout where you take out those networks at different periods of time during the training session, you are able to then actually create a more robust network in parallel. And what you're really doing is taking multiple versions of that organization, or I'm sorry, of that network, and then being able to layer each of those together. That enables you to have, at the end, when you're actually creating a new decision and you're seeing data that you have not seen before, all of those hidden layers that were dropped out from time to time, all of them are working together and giving their inputs to the output layers in every set, and that allows a more robust answer. They found that also allows the system to not optimize and get lazy towards one specific optimized answer for the period, for the data that you're seeing versus the data that you haven't seen. Now, one thing that's really interesting is that organizations have this inherent, right? We have ideas, concepts like PTO, paid time off. And many times organizations will say it's important for you to take your paid time off for the health, your own personal health, so you can relax and move and get recharged for the next push. But there's actually a strength to the organization itself. And the reason is that if you have an organization and you've got a team of 5 people, and each of them have a specific job to complete in order to make this product work very well. And everyone's specialized because it takes a lot of time and they've got a lot of pressure. So one person is focused on UI, the user experience. Another one's working on the back end and making sure that the algorithms are tight. And the other one's working on the databases in order to make that happen, right? To be able to have the information flow. And another one's working on e-commerce or what have you. And then suddenly, 1 or 2 of the team members get really sick or leave the company. Now what happens? That workflow that has been optimized for each of those individuals now is broken. And there is a critical mass in which you're not able to move forward, right? Unless you have that critical mass. In organizations in which people drop out from time to time, where others then have to take up that load, you have a much more robust organization that is more resilient to failure or to dropout. And those organizations have a tendency to be able to live and continue and thrive, because then those particular neurons or people get to see the entire thing end to end and are able to then step backwards and say, well, is this the way we should be doing this? Yes, if each of us have our roles, it's very important. We can be very efficient, but we don't actually have a chance to try new things and to get to maybe even better answer. Another thing, of course, is that with dropout, there's a lot of corporate governance now that is looking to require that sort of dropout, so to speak, where a particular person is not around for a couple weeks' time. So others can go and look into the books and do their job to see if everything is on the up and up. And I think that is one of those things that have been coming up very recently, which actually have been informed by AI, in that this has worked very well in the last few years to really make that network more robust. And as we are human networks, it allows us to be more robust. So that's one example that I've seen out there that shows really the power of looking at another organization like AI, something completely different from human-centered leadership organizations, and saying there's a lot there that we can pull out. So let's keep on going and think about what else can we look at. Inception is one of those groundbreaking algorithms, or actually architectures of AI that's been around for the last few years. And of course, we've had multiple iterations of that. But what were the key things with Inception, right? Inception had its name from the movie Inception, which talks about layers. We got to go deeper. They had 22 layers of structure in their classification engine, which was unheard of at the time. And to be able to do that required lots of compute and lots of, a lot of infrastructure to make this happen. But there was also another innovation they had in there. Because they had so many layers, the engineers couldn't really design which functions needed to occur at whatever time that needed to occur on all these layers. And so what they said was, you know what, let the AI figure this out. So we're going to put all of those different things, and in this case, convolutions, which are essentially summations of various portions of a picture, right? We're going to put them all in parallel. And then we will let the filters and the layers decide for themselves which ones are the most important given the data sets that we have. And we're going to, of course, being Google, dump the whole internet into it. And that was actually a very unique way of thinking about an organization because it allows you to then step back and say, let's look at the architecture of this particular Inception module, and let's try to design architectures that are more supportive of the data that's coming in. And I think that's where we're at right now with AI. I would say even 3-4 years ago, a lot of us were really thinking AI as more of an alchemy. We didn't really know what to do or where to do it. The libraries were not really there. It was a little arcane. You have to take, all of these linear algebra matrices, and if it doesn't really work, you just stir it again and stir it again until it comes out to be right. And then when somebody asks you, why is it right? You really can't really answer why it's right. But now we're looking more at the architecture level. We're actually looking at how these things are organized. I think that's going to give us a lot more insight into our internal organization of us as human beings. So I'm really excited to see that. But there are also applications that we can look at today. And one of these things is a military organization, right? So in an operation example that we have here, it's very similar to that of, I would say, Inception and these other organizations. Teams that deal with high uncertainty, that they don't know what their data sets are coming in at. They will employ groups with multiple redundancies, which is part and parcel with the dropout scenario that we talked about for regularization, but also maintaining specialties, right? So that's very similar to Inception, where you put a convolution filter of 1x1 versus 2x1 versus 3x1 and a max pooling, all in parallel with each other, so that all eyes can look at the situation at hand and then move forward from there. So those are the sort of things that we can actually look into and understand, that human structure and organization actually has a lot of analog to what we have today in our data sets. If you have something that's very much of a optimization problem, the organization of your company, of your team, will be very different from something where you don't have a very structured solution or question to do. So at this point, I'd like to take some questions. If I know we've dumped a lot of technical things. This is an IEEE USA presentation on organizations and leadership. I wanted to give you a little taste of that, of AI, and how some of that actually has a lot of merit to organizations. So John, do we have any questions from the audience at this time?
We do actually, Terrence. So we
Great.
have one question from one of our audience members, App Mathis, who's a regular for our webinar. So thank you for tuning in today. Our audience member asks, are there any other methods of regularization besides dropout?
Oh, absolutely. One of the more straightforward methods of regularization is fuzzing of the data that's coming in. So having kind of that fog of war that comes in, where you're taking a particular data set for the inputs and then saying, okay, we're going to deliberately put either zero it out or add noise to that input. And that's one of those methods that allows you to then find that more robust structure. Because let's say if you see 3 indicators at any given time that gives you that indication to go, and you only see 2 of those 3, maybe the 4th or 5th indicator has a probability half the time to be as good as the one that disappeared right during that time. But if you didn't have those the dropout of the first indicator, then you wouldn't, the strange enough, the network would be too lazy to look at those alternatives, because it takes a lot of energy, a lot of training to make that happen. So it will then not look at there and just say, I'm going to look at those 3. So when the case occurs, when let's say the first or second main indicator disappears, it really doesn't know what to do because it hasn't taken the time to train. And I think this is one thing that's really important about AI networks, is that they're very similar to humans in that we are lazy. We want to learn to minimize our output of learning. That's why we learn, right? So we're taking the time to do that, and it's in some ways it's a lot like when you're studying for a test in school. You want to have not all of the answers, because you don't want to learn to the test. You really want to learn how to learn and understand what you're missing, what you haven't learned that's more important, that's going to get you than what you've learned already.
Good to know. Thank you. And we got one
Thanks,
more
John.
question from our audience member. And folks, so just to let you know, we'll be answering one more question, but we'll be saving the rest of them for the end of the webinar, at the end of the presentation. So keep sending them in. Terrence, so this next question, can CEOs and other managers over-optimize and make their organizations less robust? Audience member goes on to follow, for example, removing R&D so the organization is fragile when innovation occurs and makes the organization's product obsolete.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. I think we'll actually be handling that as part of the gaming portion of the presentation. But shortly, to really put it in a nutshell, it's situational. Leaders are situational. There are some leaders who are optimized for optimization, and there are other leaders who are optimized for disruption. And I think we're seeing that in spades today. And I'm going to give an example with Twitter, right? We have Elon Musk, regarded as an innovator, as a great change agent. I would say a lot of people are saying today, this is his first real purchase of a company with an established culture, right? And he's trying to change it. His prior companies, PayPal, he started himself with Tesla. He bought it out from two other entrepreneurs who started it. And of course, SpaceX, he effectively started himself. So he was able to build that culture from the ground up. In this case, there's an established culture, and he's coming in and he's wanting to reestablish the basis of that, right? And so there's a lot of questions about what that future looks like. And the question is that the right kind of leader for that style? Can the leader themselves flex and change? Those are all questions I'm really interested in seeing as part of this Twitter saga that we've been seeing in the last 2 years, as more of an academic look into organizations and how they withstand these sort of changes.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Well, great, John. Let's move on to examples of organizations that are different than what we are normally seeing with a traditional pyramid structure. So there is a concept called holocracy. Holocracy is similar to what I talked about earlier about these special teams in the military, where there is a lot of dropout, where there is a lot of redundancy, but with that allows you to find a lot of flexibility. And I think Zappos is one of the prime examples. I think it's the only real big example of a holocracy. And it's really a flexible organization structure. So it's truly, the concept is truly Inception, right? You see some of these organizations in Google, in the early days of Google and other .com companies. But in this case, it's really looking at focusing on a direction and working towards the direction with autonomy. To say, I trust you, individuals. I've put together a culture in which individuals can see a need and then fill that need, and organize people around them who also see that need and move towards that structure. So it's a very unique decision-making process. It's continuously evolving, and there's always that question, who's in charge, right? Zappos was, I think, the only real big organization that I've seen in my research that succeeded in that. But I'm sure as the market changed, as Zappos moved into this blue waters, they were able to capture that market, define the market. Then the optimization structure comes in, because this structure tends to be fairly redundant. It also is resource intensive, right? But so you can start to see that there's actually applications of this leadership in multiple organizations. For a holocracy, you have these circles and circles of organization that are more amorphous, right? It's a little bit like trying to figure out where you are on this iceberg and trying to create that iceberg. So there's a lot of time being spent to gain consensus. Where in a hierarchy, a traditional hierarchy, you're really focused on what does my boss and what does the CEO want us to do? And when we go in that direction, we're going to go. Now, you can see with the hierarchy, the CEO makes the decision, it gets filtered down through backpropagation to the entire network, and the network just moves into that direction. It's very fast. So it's also very efficient because you only have the minimal amount of people and the organization nodes to be able to create and do that work. But if you have a Blue Waters kind of business line, something that no one else has ever done before, you're actually looking for more of a holocracy. And that's in the way, how startups happen. You have a CEO who's also the CFO, who's also the CTO, who's also the business, main business CFO. And then later on, as they grow to a point in which they're defining the market and changing their pivots, right? My favorite pivot is YouTube. YouTube started off as a dating site to upload your videos for dating. And then they realized people are uploading videos of cats and other things, and they pivoted. And that became, the primary means for us to ingest video these days, and also learn how to do things like fix cars and fly drones or watch people fishing, right? So it's very interesting to see that the pivots are all part of an organization that can do that. If you have an extreme hierarchy, you're relying on one person to identify a Blue Waters market and then go after that. In some ways, that's possible. In other ways, you want to have more of a consensus view. And that really depends on the market. So it depends on the data. Actually depends on the data that's needed, which is, it's exactly why Inception was so successful, because it assumed the data was going to figure it out as long as we have enough data. We're just going to put as many layers as possible and make it as broad as possible with all of these different ideas and let the best idea win for that particular data set. And I think that's why it made it such a robust system. So let's move on to the question of how do you organize a system like this in a holocracy? And I truly, truly believe it requires the concept of mission and vision. Now we're kind of going outside of those bounds of AI, right? Because we haven't gotten there with AI. AI is not sentient, not yet. And then, of course, there's some, I've read some interesting articles in the last week or so that a university, I think of Dublin, has declared that the human mind actually has components of quantum computing built into its brain that allows us to do things. I kind of see some of that because we're able to have mission, we are able to have vision, a vision of a future that doesn't exist yet. And we are able to direct ourselves into there. Now, regardless of what the science speaks, I want to give you that thought that separates us from current AI, because it is a very big component of leadership in how we are organized today that is not captured in AI. It's not captured in whenever you hit a training epoch on your AI algorithms. It's something that's inherently human at this point in time, inherently biological, so to speak, and something that we can capitalize on. And that's what I saw when I was writing the ultimate upgrade and looking at it. There was a limit to what I knew how to improve myself and others. And there was that limit, that edge, that barrier was what's next. What's next is the component of leadership that is crucial, that all of us must ask that question. Instead of asking someone else, what's next? Okay, I'm going to follow. Yes, hear that from your organization, but say, what's next that they're not seeing yet? How can I see that? Look, do some research, find that, and then propagate that information up. That's leadership. Leadership happens at every single level. And so in terms of an organization like Twitter, right? I think one thing that Musk does very well, and a lot of other leaders do it, Tim Cook does this well, is that they really promote a vision of the future, right? They come in and say, here is where we're going, what we're going to do, the big picture. And whatever you need to do to get to that point, if you buy into that vision, let's go. Now, if you don't buy into that vision, then don't be here to slow things down. And we're seeing that right now, in real time. Those are normal things in every organization. I wouldn't say I want to vilify the leader in this case. I wouldn't want to say that they're doing a bad job. They are trying to impart a vision and lead. Now, whether anybody follows is one thing. And then those that follow, are they able to execute given enough critical mass? That's another thing. Those are the mixtures of luck and perception and other things that make this a very interesting endeavor. But you need to have vision. Now, if you don't have vision, then it's a lot more difficult to lead, because you can have people around you, but then they're going to ask, where are you going to go? And if your answer is, well, I don't know, then it's going to go somewhere else. And it's not about gathering leaders or people to be a leader is to gather people. It's to say, what are we doing? Why are we here? What's this purpose that we're driven towards? So in many ways, the ultimate upgrade is realizing that you are limited. You can go all the way up to that edge, but you're limited by this beyond. And how do you get to that beyond? How do you get there? I'll take you right there to think about that. And it's up to you to get that vision and mission for yourself. Not what the world tells you is the mission. And there's a lot of different things that are out there that, that give you a lot of inputs of what the mission should be. I encourage you to think about your own mission and your own vision. So let's move on a little bit in terms of just talking. There's some local roles that we have that allow leadership to happen. Government, academia, and industry. Just wanted to share little bits of that, and if there's more interest, we can talk later about this. But in terms of leadership, governments are mostly focused on decision making, creating a path. Academia is mostly focused on options, creating options for people, pushing that boundaries, thinking the unthinkable, developing the imagination, and then execution. Industry just makes it happen. Don't try to give me a science project. I need to make this happen today. Thinking, same thing. Predictability. I need to be more predictable in my information out. The Fed does that. They're very, very predictable right now with their interest rates. Yes, we're going to raise. Yes, we're going to raise. You think we're not going to raise? We're going to raise, right? They're very predictable. Academia is more blue sky. They're looking at what if we didn't raise and we use something called Bitcoin to make this happen, right? And then the industry is practical. Okay, you're going to raise, so we're going to then do this with our interest rates. And so therefore, this is how we're going to execute this plan and make money and all that. And the language comes out of there, right? So government their language is about power. Academia, their language is about freedom. And industry, their language is about money. So each of those things, I would say, based off just my experience seeing that in my career, there are different aspects of control and message and language and thinking, but they all are actually very useful if they work in tandem together, because each of them can then specialize in those values and give a perspective that's very unique and very, very focused. I think that's one of the strengths of America, is that we have an integration of all these three things, government, academia, industry, in a manner that is not constrained by either. They're really running independently. And it's the cooperation of both that makes it a very special endeavor. So I'm going to go into a new concept, which I'm actually very passionate about, which is Overwatch 2. And if you saw some of the promo video that I sent out this past week of Genji, right, living at the edge of performance, leading at the edge of performance. Overwatch 2 just came out as a new game, right? It's been around for about 5-6 years as Overwatch 1. It's now free to play. And I've been tracking this over the years because I started to see that there's actually organizational structure and also aspects of leadership that are really important. So I want to touch upon this, work through this, save some time for questions later, but also see if there's any interest in looking at each of these individual parts of the game and seeing how we can make this interesting and learn from it. So let's start talking about the structure of the game. Overwatch has 3 different roles that you get to play. It's a 5-person game now with Overwatch 2, and the first one is the tank, right? The tank is the leader. It's the de facto leader of the group. It is, you could say, is the CEO of the organization. They're the ones who set the battleground, set the stage. They're the ones who draw that line, and they also draw the fire, right? Some CEOs are very good at drawing all the fire at them so that their team can work in the background and make things happen. That is the role of the tank. They're the ones to draw the fire and also set those battle lines, right? They're the ones with the mission and the vision that everyone then follows. And the other part is the support. Now, there's actually been a lot of, when you think about support, you think, okay, well, that's kind of the weaker position. That's the position that no one really wants. And you can see that because every time you play, the support one gets all of these bonuses if you play it. Now, why is that? And I actually find this very interesting because if you think about it, the support in an organization is the mid-level management. They're the ones who are taking care of their employees, right? So the support is typically a healer, and they're calling the shots. They see the environment and more tactical, right? The CEO is right in the front line. They're getting all of the hits. They're drawing all the fire. The support tends to be in the midline or the back line, depending on the type of support that you're choosing. And they're the ones who are healing and rallying the troops and getting them focused. The CEO cannot do, the tank cannot do their job without a support protecting them, healing them, keeping them focused. That support also has roles within the communication of a team because they can see the entire playing field, whereas the tank only sees the front line and decides this is where we're going to move, right? So the support actually is very important. I love Zenyatta because he's more of a backline player that can then do very tactical insertions of healing as well as debuffing or hurting the other the opposition, and then creating those balances in which the teammates will be able to win. And then lastly, you have the damage. The damage is interesting because everybody wants to be damaged, right? Those actually represents the subject matter experts, the employees of the company. They're the ones who actually do all of the heavy lifting, right? The damage is fairly weak in defense. They put out a lot of product, but they need support. They need the support of their support class, which is their managers, as well as a vision to direct where they're going to go in the CEO. And if you think about it, each of these are subject matter experts, right? Some of these characters, if you play the game, are the ones that go off on their own and they do flanking maneuvers where they're out in the back line of the opposition and picking people off. Others are right next to the CEO, fighting with them, providing cover, using the CEO as cover, and then providing the extra firepower that the CEO needs to push that line forward, right? So the damage is the most popular, but it's also it's also because these are all the subject matter experts of your company. Without the damage, neither the support nor the tank could actually make any movements forward. Now with that, it's actually interesting because there's a meta, right? So there's a meta to this. What is the meta? Well, a meta is the game within the game. Think about Inception, think about all these things. It is an ability to see that the choice of the CEO, the type of support that you have for the CEO and the employees, and the type of employees or the damage really affect the gameplay, right? It affects the game, and actually the environment affects the gameplay. So in certain places in which you have very narrow environments, you want to have players that can work in very narrow confined areas. If you have much open areas, you might want to have a sniper that can be very, very far away and engage targets at a distance, right? The surroundings, the environment changes the way the structure is organized. And then lastly, it's also the opposition. Your adversary changes the way you play. And so with that, each of these characters also have strengths and weaknesses, and they all interact with each other. So there might be another side of the team, the other team actually has a very good combination against your particular damage or support character or tank character. A lot of the good players are able to switch and see that change and say, if I switch to this other character, I have now improved my strengths and or rather mitigated my weaknesses on this team, and now I can then affect and push forward in that line. So just want to just give you those thoughts, and it's a very brief overview that the organization's success depends on the team that complements each other's play style, looking at the environment that's around them, and then also focusing on a vision and a mission to go and direct the next steps in that organization. So I love Overwatch as part of this to see how each of these things happens. It's always good to take notes and understand, because you can actually then allow to yourself to use this to create your own team and your own future team with each of these. So let's say you want to be a CEO, you want to be able to have that line, go play as a tank. I tend to be more of a support character because I like to sit in the back lines and support and see the more tactical areas. And others love to be damaged, right? But you can always flex those roles. And each of the characters here have very different roles and ways. So I've actually been working through all of the characters in order to gain a better understanding of what I like to do versus what I don't like to do. And from there, gain an understanding of what needs to be improved in the real world. So it's in a nutshell to say that the Overwatch meta has very interesting implications to your actual life. And to not discount it as something that you're just wasting or relaxing. It's actually something that you can learn from. So that's a challenge that I have for you as you look into the ultimate upgrade. So key takeaways that we have: AI architectures can provide insight into human organizations. As the business evolves, new organizations, maybe something that's moving from a holocracy or a startup to a very refined organizational structure that doesn't have any R&D, can be more effective depending on your market environment. And so as leaders, we do need to apply engineering rigor to organization structures. So as an IEEE member or engineer, think about your organizational structure as that, an architecture that can be changed. And lastly, today's games give you insight into your leadership style. And with the meta, the best players look to flex their play styles to, one, exploit the other team's weaknesses, secondly, to strengthen your team's game, as well as understand what you're most comfortable with, and then go into that uncomfortability and lead at the edge of performance. So find a good team, lead in every role that you have with an aligned mission and vision. So those are the key insights that I wanted to share with everyone as we round out this series. It's been a really great experience for me. It's really allowed me to dig deep into myself and see what do I need to do better, and also to understand that there's something in it for everyone, and we need to work together in order to make this organization, this meta, become much more than it really is. So with that, I'll take questions. Appreciate your time and attention. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Terrence. First off, really love the presentation. Really love the especially the last part regarding gaming and comparing it to an organizational structure. Really like that analogy. Um, yeah, I love it. So before we go on to audience questions, I do have a question of my own, and it may be a little bit similar, and hoping to get your thoughts on it. So I know gamification is becoming a really big thing regarding like leadership development as well in companies or just getting employees more getting more employee engagement, excuse me. I've been hearing there are even organizations that have been applying gamification in their leadership development as well, applying it to critical solving or problem solving, innovating new products, learning new skills. So, what my question is, what are your thoughts on gamification excuse me, as a tool, that was a typo, to drive higher levels of business performance and employee engagement towards leadership development?
Well, thanks, Jonathan. That's a very, very good question. Gamification is very important in some ways. I think when applied in a correct manner, allows you to gain metrics on the engagement of your employees and your organization, allows your organization to track the system. But it can also end up being like a merit badge system with Boy Scouts. It could actually just become a plethora of things that people think they have to grind through, right? And I think that's one of the things in games we don't like, right? And I'm going to give an example with Overwatch 2, right? If you don't pay money for the battle pass, you don't get any of the characters. You get 5. And then you have to grind through levels and levels before you get the opportunity to try other things. I think that's a negative aspect of gamification, is that you feel and become structured in a point in which you feel limited, that you're not able to try different things without having to go through all of those different levels. So I would say with organizations that are looking to gamify, try not to work on the grinding aspect, but focus on the opportunity aspect. So they have it more parallelized, where you can go into one particular character class, work in that for a little bit. If you didn't like it, jump over and try another one. But the organization of those classes and of those particular steps, I think it's actually more important for the HR themselves, the leaders themselves, to understand what is necessary to have a successful organization and the types of skill sets each of those individuals need to have. I think that's actually the key, that the game becomes a learning tool for the leader themselves, not necessarily a super important thing of the employee.
Nice, great insight. Thank you so much. So this next question from our audience members, Kevin Brooks asks, do you still play that Simon on the shelf behind you?
That's a good question. It's always interesting to see what people have behind them, because it shows, it gives them an opportunity to share things that are outside of the spoken word. Simon was a game that I used to play as a kid. It also is, I played with my cousin whose name is Simon, and it has sentimental value for me in understanding it. I like to put it up there because my kids, some of them are very, very good at it, and some of them are not so good at it. And it reminds me that in any game in life, it's the relationships that matter the most, and not so much the performance of the game. That's my answer.
Awesome, love that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Kate asks, would you suggest managers or leaders encourage their employees to change their play style to expand their skill set or see things from other perspectives?
That's a very good question, Kate. I think there's a tension that is always in between a manager and a leader. They're not necessarily the same thing. We all want to have a manager and leader be together, to be influenced in the same person. But sometimes they have opposing things, right? So management has a tendency to optimize. They want to minimize the amount of disruption to an organization. They want to be able to have them all be specialized. And you'll see this in very large organizations, the 20,000, 50,000 member organizations. You have a role and you need to be in that role. If you move out of that role, my job now has to go find somebody else to put in that role. That's a lot of work. We need to be able to move forward on our product, so stay in that role. And that is some of the frustrations one may see in especially large organizations. So the changing the skill set is more for them of, let's give them an opportunity to keep engaged. In other organizations that are much smaller, you tend to see a need for multiple roles to be placed on a person, and usually less structure. So you don't have to go through these trainings in order to then be able to do this. They're like, oh, we need a hand right now. Why don't you come on over and try it out? So it's a little bit less formal. So you get it's a mixed bag though, because you may not have the skills necessary to do that. You're learning on the job, which is great, but you also don't have the formal skills. So I would say that it's situational. I would say it depends on where the managers are and what the product is. If you've got a very streamlined thing that needs to be done, then I think additional skill sets are not needed in that organization, and it becomes more of a retention tool. Whereas others in which you have a need for all of these things all at the same time, when you have a market that's continually changing, then you would want to have your employees be as versatile as possible. So again, it's a match of the data and the purpose of the organization, and make sure that you're also aligned in your career and lifestyle and proclivities to that. Good question.
Fantastic. Thanks for the question, Kate. So this isn't necessarily a question, but an insight from one of our actual members, Connie Kelly. Thanks for tuning in, Connie. Leadership and managerialship are two distinct skills. Though there's some overlap, there are different goals and responsibilities and skills. I'm assuming she meant skill sets. And I think that's a really great insight. Leadership and managerialship, I think, is a common misunderstanding, or common thing that people get mixed up or think are the same things. Any thoughts
Absolutely.
on that?
I've seen that in my experience. Yeah. Being a manager doesn't make you a leader. You just have the hierarchical structure there. It's important to be a leader in every level, in every stage of your career, because we need more leaders. And that's the one thing I've driven home in every presentation I've had. Every time I talk to someone about leadership, we need more leaders in the world. The world needs direction. It needs mission and vision. Without mission and vision, we become just the machines that we're utilizing to do things better. And we need to go above that. We need to rise above that and have that mission and vision and then drive towards that. And the mission and vision in which everyone prospers and benefits is the one that eventually will win. And I have full faith in that because that is that self-propagating infinite game that a lot of people talk about.
Awesome, thank you. And this last thing before we end things off, Kevin Brooks made a statement: leaders determine the right things to do, managers do things right. And I love that statement. Thank you for that,
No, thank
Kevin.
you. Thanks, Kevin.
So yeah, folks, unfortunately we are out of time. Terrence, thank you so much for joining us today and providing our audience your insight into the organizational structures and styles to help them transform into the leaders they were meant to be. And thank you to our audience for
Thank you,
attending
Jonathan.
today's live stream webinar as well, and for your great questions. Before
Yeah, it's
we
been really
close,
great. I just want to say, if you want to continue the conversation, please reach out to me on LinkedIn and we can talk DM or on a post. That'd be great.
absolutely. And folks, before we close things off, I would like to make a special announcement for our viewers, in case you haven't heard. Uh, in partnership with Royal Caribbean, IEEE USA has opened up registrations for our set sail with IEEE USA 50th anniversary celebration cruise happening next year in October 2023. It'll feature exclusive events, entertainment, and networking opportunities that you won't be able to get anywhere else. The link to the site where you can book your ticket has been provided below, as well as in the comment section as well. Please give me 1 second to post it. So we definitely hope you can join us for that. If you the earlier you book, the earlier you'll be able to get more convenient travel deals as well. Let's see. So, folks, we hope you enjoyed and learned a lot from our Ultimate Upgrade Essential series presented by Dr. Terrence Yo, and will join us for upcoming webinars in the future as well. The entire series has been archived in our channels for on-demand access at any time. You can also find Dr. Yo's ebooks of the same title in our IEEE USA shop at ieeeusa.org/shop. Please don't forget to share, like, and subscribe to our channels on social media. Check back daily for future live stream updates. Have a great day, everyone.